Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So, before I begin today, I just want to give you two short notes. Number one, if you're looking at the screen, what you're seeing is my logo for my new comic company, the Fourth Age Comics, and I will probably start my videos with this logo from now on. I'd like to animate it so that it turns around or something. If anybody knows of a good program to do that, let me know. The other thing being that my graphic novel, Thomas Valiant, is now shipping out to customers. So if you ordered it, just watch your email for a notification that it has been sent. The process is a little longer than I would like of packaging and sending them, partly because I have to sign them all. But hey, I promise that to everyone, and that's what I'm going to do. But on to the topic at hand. And just to let you know, for the majority of the week, I plan to do a completely different video from what I'm about to set in front of you. But then something happened on Thursday. Today is Saturday morning. On Thursday, I posted something that got quite a reaction. First, I posted it on the community section of my YouTube channel, and then I posted it on Twitter. Now, what did I post? Well, I'll put it up in the background. It is a picture of the cover of a new hardcover book coming out from Marvel in October of this year. And what I tagged at the top as my comment was, just a preview of a hardcover book coming out from Marvel, October 2022. Call me crazy, but I think there's an agenda at play here. And if you're just listening to my video and not actually watching the screen, the title of this book is My Superhero is Black. And it shows a bunch of black superheroes from the Marvel Universe standing in one general direction. It really has no theme or coherency to it whatsoever. But anyways, I want to talk about this book and the reaction I got to my posts because I think it's a very good example, certainly a very good starting point to what I'm always talking about. How the quote-unquote progressive ideology is trying to destroy the idea of hero. So when I posted it on YouTube, the comments usually went into one of three sections. Number one, saying, this is garbage tier. Number two, saying, Marvel is racist. Number three, saying, I am a person of this race and of this audience that they're trying to appeal to, and I find this offensive. And while I think all of those comments are valid, and thank you very much to everyone who commented on that post, I want to concentrate on the reaction I got on Twitter. Because I not only got comments of that kind, mostly positive comments of the kind I just talked about, but I also got a large number of negative comments. Now, I can deal with negative comments. I got no problem with negativity in the fact that if you want to oppose my idea, you go right ahead. We're not going to get forward with any ideas unless they get challenged, unless we can argue about them. But the point is that, especially on Twitter, no one wants to actually argue about things. They simply want to attack you. And really, there were hundreds of comments to people replying to my tweet and other tweets off of my tweet. And I read them all, and they're still going on Saturday morning. And I can only find one where a guy actually wanted to have a conversation about this. All the other negative comments were simply attacks. And those attacks went into one of two categories. They would be outright attacks, calling me an hysterophobe of one kind or another, or at the very least implying it. The other one being a question, what exactly is this agenda you think is there? But then if there was anything more to the tweet, and there usually was, you could see that this was not a legitimate question as I want to have a discussion, but it was more a, what do they call it? A feint, where they were trying to draw me into a unfavorable position so that they could then attack me. So underlying it, it's either an overt or a covert attack upon what I had said. But I want to answer that question for the people who said, what exactly is this agenda? Because quite honestly, I think the responses that I got to this tweet was exactly the most beautiful example of the agenda at play. So, in part, this is my answer to that question, and I am going to post it to Twitter, but I doubt any of the people who asked that question are actually going to listen to my video. And no, I'm not going to respond to them on Twitter. And why? Well, for the same reason I don't fling dung back at a monkey after they've thrown it at me, because that's the argumentative equivalent of what Twitter is. I'm there to use it as a tool, not to be used by it. But as I said, I think the responses, the negative responses that are simply attacks, and again, everyone I read except for one was this kind of response. All of those responses is exactly the agenda that I was referring to at play. And that agenda quite specifically expresses itself in the following way. I dared to even hint at a question aimed at, well, what the critical drinker calls the message. And I think I'll use that term for the rest of this video, the message. So I just hinted at a question to the message, and doing so is a call to people who have been taught that the message is actually true in an irrational and emotional way, by the way, which I'll talk about in a minute. But since they've been taught in this irrational, emotional way that the message is true, they've also been taught that if anyone even dares to question the message, they must be attacked. That is the agenda at play. Now, it wasn't my intent to put this up to provoke such a response, but really, the response is the exact thing that I was talking about. Now, as I had mentioned, the people who were overt in their attacks upon what I had said called me an ist or a phobe, usually connecting it to a race. So, I'm going to start there in my discussion of the particular tenor of this response and of this part of the message. Does this book have a racial component to it? Yes, it does. And I will get into that in a minute or two. But I would say that racial component to it is not necessary for the message that needs to be put out. It's simply the flavor of the message that is sold to people in North America. But I suppose I should take a step back and explain myself when I said these people are defending an idea which they believe to be true, but is only a belief taught to them in an emotional way that comes from an ideological standpoint and is not actually true. And in order to do that, let's look first at this book itself and what its part of the message really is. So this book, again, is a hardcover book that talks about the history of Black superheroes in the Marvel Universe. But it's not about all the Black superheroes in particular. What they're focusing on is the Black superheroes as they are written by Black creators. And that is very noteworthy, and I'll get back to that in a minute. But for a second, I want to look at the two people who are the authors of this book. A man named John Jennings and a woman called Angelique Roche. Now, I know Angelique Roche fairly well because she became one of the main presenters of Marvel podcast about 2 years ago. So I've listened to her talk on many, many occasions because I listen to a fair number of Marvel podcasts. She is very much a purveyor of the quote-unquote progressive message, but she does it in a very judicious way. She's much more reserved than the people who have been on these podcasts for the last 10 years or so. This is no surprise to me because if you look into her background, she was actually trained as a lawyer. And here's an excerpt from her own webpage that describes what she did in the past and does now. It says, Angelique created communications infrastructures and crafted narratives for organizations and social justice issue campaigns. Now, I'll probably do an entire video about this woman sometime in the future because I think she's one of the rising stars of what you're going to see coming out of Marvel in the next little while. Not to say she's a creative person, but she's an administrative person who, as it says, crafts narratives around social justice issues. And what, might you say, is wrong with that? Well, again, I would say that if you have a narrative that includes social justice issues, you're actually telling a story and it has a political tone to it. And some people might like that. It might be okay, but at the very least, it's a story. But if you're structuring your narrative around an issue, it's no longer a story. It's a propaganda machine in order to teach that specific issue from something that looks like a story, but only looks like a story because it is a crafted narrative around that issue. So there's a distinct difference between telling a story and crafting a narrative. Now, does this have anything to do with this book in particular? Well, let's listen to Angelique herself, the quote that is given from the very first article about this book. She says, John and I have taken great care to craft not just a historical reference, but a narrative that highlights the journey of Black superheroes past, present, and future. And the other author of this book has a similar quote from the same article. He says, we hope that audiences are thrilled to experience the spectrum of representations of Blackness in My Superhero is Black via the lens of the universe that is Marvel Comics as we are. So first off, you'll note once again, when Angelique Roche talks about the narrative, this other person, this John Jennings, talks about it in terms of viewing it through the lens of Marvel Comics. This language simply betrays the fact that, again, they're not telling a story. They're using Marvel and the Marvel stories as a vehicle for the idea that they are presenting. And again, that idea that they are presenting is what he says here, a spectrum of representations of blackness. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what this person, John Jennings, actually does and why he is part of this project, why he was brought on to be someone to write this project, what his qualifications are, and we do that through the promotional material that talks about him that is put out from Marvel or is given to other outlets through Marvel. What they always talk about is his connection to Afrofuturism. And by the way, Angelique Roche is also a promoter of Afrofuturism. Again, she does it in a very legalistic and very judicious way. She's someone that presents this over and over again in talks and panels and things like that. So again, she's very different from the presenters at Marvel for the last 10 years. She does it at an arm's length, but it's the exact same thing at the core. Now, some of you may be asking, what in the world is Afrofuturism? Well, there are many different and sometimes conflicting definitions of what Afrofuturism is, but at its core, I would say it is the following. It is the futuristic idea, that is to say, a future mythology where Africa exists in basically the state of Wakanda. That is to say, in a highly technical, highly advanced state with a supremely high state of living. And I use the example of Wakanda very specifically because this is one of the main reasons why so many people are so enthralled with the idea of the Black Panther movie. Again, it's a crafted narrative. It's not actually a story to them. To them, it's a part of Afrofuturism. That is to say, it's a future mythology of what Africa will look like. And I say future mythology. What does that mean? Well, for most of us, if you look at mythology, it's in our past. It's something that informs our past. But for a quote-unquote progressive, they're always looking towards the future. Therefore, everything of note and merit has to be in the future. Therefore, if they have a mythology, which this quite specifically is, it must be in the future, not in the past, to draw them forward, not to push them forward from the past. Now, just as a quick aside, one of the funny things about Afrofuturism is the fact that I've done a little bit of research into this, and what I have come up with is the fact that people who live in Africa don't actually like Afrofuturism or the idea of Afrofuturism and say it's for those people who are diaspora people from Africa. It is their mythology, not ours. I just wanted to put in that funny note. It doesn't really have a lot to do with what I'm about to talk about. But you might say, what is the problem with Afrofuturism? Aren't these people just looking towards the future in hopes of a better, brighter future and using that to propel themselves towards it? Well, not exactly. You see, I did a little bit of research into Afrofuturism, read a little bit of the books which some people who promote Afrofuturism claim are the founding documents of the ideas of Afrofuturism. So I read those books. And what does it say within those books? What is the idea expressed within them, and where does it come from? Well, the idea is a very specific kind of anti-colonialism, and it uses the following analogy to try to show people that Africa needs to carve out its own path. The analogy is that each individual race exists within its own trench. That is to say, we might be moving forward as human beings in the same general direction, but you, as a race of this specific kind, are in one trench, and if someone else is of a different race, then they are in another trench. Now, this is an analogy, so obviously it's not going to be purely rational. It succumbs to the analogical fallacy, but you'll have to bear with me because this is what they use as their key talking point to describe what the basis of this idea is. And by the way, I'm not entirely sure why they use this analogy, possibly because they think that people moving in this one direction have moved in a very specific path for so long that they have dug themselves a trench with the amount of people that have been moving in this direction, sort of in a straight line, person by person, always going in this direction. I'm not entirely sure. That is my assumption from what I have read, but don't take that as gospel, certainly not. But the point of this analogy is as follows. If you're a black person, you're in the trench of the black race, and therefore you cannot move out of that trench. You are moving in one direction in this trench, and you cannot get out of it. And if you're in the white trench, then you're in the white trench. You can't get out. You might be moving in the same direction as the people in the black trench, but you're not going to be able to really interact with them in any significant way. Also, these trenches are portrayed as being parallel to each other, and that they can never meet. Therefore, every person of every specific race can only understand the experience, the history, the culture, etc. of their own race. So if you're a white person, you can only understand the white race. If you're a black person, you can only understand the black race, etc., etc. Because you're stuck in this trench. You might be moving forward, but you can't get out of it. There is no way to mix and mingle, and therefore you cannot understand the people in another trench. This is the foundational idea of Afrofuturism, because they're basically saying that black people, because they're only talking about black Africans, they're saying black people must make their own future based upon their own ideas, their own history, their own experience, because they cannot borrow any ideas from any other culture, because they cannot understand, nor can the other cultures understand them and their culture. Therefore, they have to build it on their own. And any attempt, either through force from another race, that is to say, something like colonialism, to make people of one race like another, is destined to fail because it simply cannot be done. And even if it's a person who says, I like the ideas of this other race, and therefore I want to participate in them, and that's the future that I want to drive towards, that can't be done either. Because, again, they're stuck in their own trench. In the minds of the people who came up with this concept of Afrofuturism, anyone trying to do that, anyone trying to borrow things from another race, is destined to fail, because they simply cannot use them correctly, because they cannot understand them correctly, because they're from another trench. And you, as part of this race, are stuck in this trench. There's no getting out of it. And as I said, this concept of Afrofuturism is what is promoted by the people at Marvel who are trying to sell this book as the main drawing point to try to bring people in to listen to what this book has to say. And again, how do I know that? It's because when Marvel puts out promotional material about the main author of this book, John Jennings, they always talk about how he is an Afrofuturist, or at the very least has helped adapt other Afrofuturist stories into different mediums. And as I said, Angelique Roche is someone who promotes the idea of Afrofuturism. And this is what is being expressed when John Jennings says he wants the readers to be thrilled by the experience of the spectrum of representations of blackness. And this permeates the very existence of this book. Why? How do I know that? Well, because, as they stated in the promotion of this book, although they might look at other black characters that were created by non-black people, what they're going to concentrate on is black characters being written by black people. And why do they concentrate on this? Well, because of the ideas, the founding ideas of something like Afrofuturism. That is to say, only black authors can really understand black characters and can really present to people a black character to a black audience so that they can understand it. Now, I started this by talking about the fact that this is an ideological point and is taught to them not in a rational way, but in an emotional way. So let's get back to that point just for a second. And I think the best way to do that is to look at one of the stated authors that they're going to concentrate on in this book, who is Ta-Nehisi Coates. Because although Ta-Nehisi Coates is not an Afrofuturist, not that I can see, His ideas run parallel to the ideas of Afrofuturism, and his ideas have the exact same origin point as Afrofuturism, so describing one really is describing the other. Instead of talking about colonialism, which is what Afrofuturism really is centered around, what Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about, what he writes about, is the idea that America is a racist country, that it always has been and always will be. He talks about white privilege, he talks about systemic racism, he talks about how America needs to be destroyed in its current iteration if it ever wishes to succeed. I know that sounds like an idiotic statement, but these are the kind of statements that he makes. So his ideas are very much similar to that of Afrofuturism, where the Afrofuturist says we need to take African people who live in Africa and begin a new culture based upon only what they understand, not from any colonialism. Ta-Nehisi Coates would say similar things about America, saying that we need to base a new America upon the ideas of people of color and other kinds of intersectional representations in order to build a country that is actually going to be something we want in the future. And where do the ideas of Ta-Nehisi Coates, and by extension Afrofuturism, come from? Well, Ta-Nehisi Coates promotes things like the 1619 Project. These are quite specifically, and what he is saying, are quite specifically based upon the ideas of critical race theory. And as I've gone over this many times in the past in several videos, I'm only going to give you the bare bones of the argument right here once again. If you go back to even the most simplistic of the left-wing, far left-wing sources, like Wikipedia, you can see them stating right out that where critical race theory comes from, it is a derivation of critical theory. And where does critical theory come from? Critical theory comes from the Frankfurt School, which, although it started really, I would say, as far back as the 1920s, it was a group of intellectuals that got together in Frankfurt, Germany, and put together the idea of critical theory for a very specific reason and purpose. The reason was they were all avowed Marxists, and they wanted to reignite the grand global communist revolution. And the way that they would do this is to make criticism something that is only negative, that there can be no such a thing as constructive criticism. So what they wished to do was to promote ideas in order for people to use criticism as a weapon, as a tool, a hammer, to hammer away, chip away, little by little, at the legs that hold up Western society. And after chipping away at it through decade after decade, in doing so, and making sure that it is always negative, making sure that it never builds anything up, they will take out the legs that underpin Western society, and then Western society will then eventually fall, and then their grand international socialist revolution can ensue. But let's pull out 2 points from this. Number one being the fact that, you see, this idea is to use criticism as a weapon, constantly as a weapon. And this goes right back to that Twitter mob that I was talking about. Not just with my tweet, but any Twitter mob. This is the exact reason why they exist. This, again, as I said, is the agenda at play. All they wish to do is attack. I challenged the message, and whenever you challenge the message, you must be attacked. You see, this is critical theory very much at play. Attack anyone who is trying to either defend what actually exists, the status quo, trying to defend Western civilization, trying to defend what has made our countries great. If anyone dares to do that, they must be taken out. They must be attacked, because criticism is there as a weapon and used simply to destroy all of those things that I just talked about. And one of the stated ways that they promote the idea of critical theory is by teaching it to what the political term is useful idiots. And this leads to the point that I was talking about. Why do they teach it to useful idiots? Well, because, first of all, you can take them and use them as a weapon. You make them into a mob, you rile them up emotionally, and then you point them in the direction of your enemy, and your enemy is therefore destroyed. That's how you use useful idiots. And yes, it's all based upon emotion. One of the ideas of critical theory, one of the ideas that needs to be destroyed according to the concepts of critical theory, is the idea of critical thinking. Critical thinking is how you think rationally and logically. It too needs to be destroyed. Therefore, you cannot certainly teach these ideological points in a way that is rational and logical, because that would go against the entire reason of why you're teaching these people these points. You need to teach them in a way that's irrational and illogical, and that makes them even more useful as useful idiots. And by the way, if someone says, that's not the reason I'm supporting this, I'm doing this for a different reason. Well, I'm sorry, but that just goes to show how much of a useful idiot that you are. If you're giving these people support, and you don't understand where their ideas come from, if you don't understand their motivation, but you are supporting where they're driving towards, and you're doing it because you don't understand and you apply your own mentality to it, you're nothing but a useful idiot. Quite honestly, you're the most favorable of useful idiots because you add your own drive to get to the place where these people want you to go. And I just want to bring up 2 points here very quickly to support what I just said. If anyone says, oh, I don't know what I'm talking about, I have actual degrees in political science and political theory. And what we did back in the 1990s was to trace these ideas back to their origin point. I have read the material of the Frankfurt School. I have read their books. I have done reports on how their ideas actually get disseminated. This is exactly what they wanted to do. This is exactly the way they state in their own books, in their own terms, A, what they want to do, and B, how they're going to do it. And number 2, if you say, well, that's just something that happened in history, that's not what people believe anymore, I will reference you once again back to that chart that came out from the Smithsonian Institute, I think it was in 2020, which said, these are the key elements of, well, let's just say the supremacy of a certain very light-skinned people. And at nearly the top of that list was reason and logical thinking. Those 2 things were at the top of the list of things that needed to be gotten rid of. And again, this is 2020, and not promoted by some radical fringe organization. This came out from the Smithsonian. And before moving on, I'll just tie this up in a nice little bow by making a few other connections. Along with that article by the Smithsonian, there were several other articles coming out at the same time, which also claimed that people who are white cannot question the, what they call, lived experience of people of color. That is to say, you cannot apply your ideas, even rationally or logically, to their experiences. And again, this connects right back to those ideas of Afrofuturism, where you are of a different race. Therefore, there is no way, rational or otherwise, that you can understand how these people of color actually feel, actually think, actually do things. You simply cannot. Therefore, you have to just accept them. And once again, Smithsonian 2020. Or how's about the fact that a lot of these people, these attackers that were on Twitter, have Black Lives Matter symbols in their bios? Now, what does that have to do with anything? Well, because Black Lives Matter is the forefront of these kinds of ideas, of the defense of these kinds of ideas. And where does Black Lives Matter come from? Well, 2 out of the 3 people who created this movement have stated from their own mouths that they are trained Marxists. And oh, by the way, as far back as 1912, I can point to historical documents of socialist communist people within Europe saying that if we wish to export these ideas to America, the only way that we can do so is through a different model. The European model will not work there. We cannot sell them class warfare. We must make it race warfare. Again, this is 110 years ago that they were saying this. And so, if you have someone today who is creating a movement which says that they are trained Marxist and creating it as such, and they're using the tactics that were developed by trained Marxists 60 years ago, and they're using the blueprints that were set out by trained Marxists over 120 years ago, yeah, I'm going to take them at their word and say they're trained Marxists, and their movement is in order to serve the ends of Marxism, and they want to do the exact thing that has been done for the last 120 years and create useful idiots in order to use them to attack their opponents. But even though this video is getting kind of long, I want to move on to my secondary point. And my secondary point is how all of this destroys the idea of hero. Now, in order to do this, all I got to do is look at the title of this book itself. The title is My Superhero is Black. Now, despite the fact that the people defending this are useful idiots, and I would say even the people writing this, and even Marvel, are intermediary useful idiots. And by the way, you can see one of my other posts that I made this week to support that claim, because Disney, the owner of Marvel, actually put out a statement after some of these useful idiots started attacking them and said, yes, we need to interfere more within politics. But those people who are not useful idiots, who actually promote these ideas, they do have some concept of rationality, and they do use rationality in order to further their own ends. Although they don't want the plebes using it, they certainly do. I'm certain they themselves don't use it in a strict way, but they use it enough to get across their message, because, like it or not, and they don't like it, but they have to use it in order to convey the message to other people that they're trying to teach, that the very thing that they're using to teach them, rationality, either does not exist, or if it does, it should not be used. So I want to look exactly at the title of this book and break it down rationally and logically, because it's quite a rational and logical proposition. Because you have a defined subject and predicate. And what happens in a logical and rational proposition? Well, you see, the subject and the predicate are joined together by the word is. Is means existence. What happens logically with such a proposition? Well, what exists, is that your subject exists as part of the essence of the predicate. So, what is your subject? The subject is my superhero. What is the predicate? Is black. So they're saying that my superhero, and my being either Marvel or the people who read this book, my superhero, and really we can drop super and just leave it at hero. Super is a superfluous part of this statement at this point, but we can leave it in. It doesn't matter. It still just means hero. They're saying that my hero is black. That is to say, the subject and the predicate agree with each other in that the essence of the subject exists within the predicate. That is to say, that the reason for these people, that these heroes are heroes, is because of the color of their skin. And not only is this the logical way to look at this proposition, but it is, as I have gone over in the first part of what I was talking about, is the exact same thing that these people that are putting out this book and that are putting out this message also want to convey. That these heroes are indeed heroes because of the color of their skin. Or at the very least, are heroes to people with similar skin color because of the color of their skin. Not because of what they do, not because of who they are, but because of the accident of the color of their skin. And this destroys the idea of hero itself. Because, like it or not, the stories that make up Marvel's history, and that's what this book is about, the stories that make up Marvel's history, they are built upon the traditional Western idea of what a hero is. And I would extend that and say that Western idea of what a hero is really is universal to all mankind, but it is expressed most notably within Western civilization. But it is the concept that a hero is a paragon of virtue. He can access those virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. The point being that those virtues are principles. That is to say, they exist for the access of all mankind, no matter what accidents actually adhere to any of those people within mankind. That is to say, you can access these things, these virtues, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter when you are, no matter how intelligent you are, and certainly no matter what the color of your skin is. And not only that, but because we can all access these principles in this way, we have a common language, by which we can understand each other. There is no trench here and trench there, and I can't understand you because you're of a different race than me. No, we have a language that is built upon reality itself and the reality of human existence that we can all access and therefore understand each other. And this is exactly the idea that is being destroyed by the mechanism of critical theory, which is meant to destroy. It is the idea that is destroyed by the statement, my superhero is black. That is the agenda for this statement being made and for the people defending it. They want to destroy the traditional idea of hero because they're nothing more than useful idiots who are pushing blindly forward with the idea that a hero can only exist due to the unique nature of something like the color of his skin. And once you get there, once you teach people that, once it becomes the medium by which a generation actually understands the world, so too are they going to topple the idea that supports Western civilization that we all cling to, that states all men are created equal. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.